When Mark and I first set foot on our riverfront property in Willow Creek Estates, it felt like stepping into a dream. The house wasn't just a structure. It was a sanctuary, nestled at the edge of the neighborhood, far from the cookie-cutter homes that lined the main streets. Our little slice of heaven had everything we'd ever wanted. There was the cozy wooden deck where we sipped coffee every morning, the gentle slope of green grass leading down to the riverbank, and the soothing sound of water flowing endlessly. It was peaceful, private, and perfect. Every evening, we would sit by the river with a blanket, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and pink. Sometimes, Mark would bring out his fishing rod, and I'd float lazily in my kayak, feeling like the luckiest person alive. That river wasn't just water, it was freedom. Freedom from noise, from rules, from the constant pressure to fit into someone else's idea of perfection. It was ours, and no one could take it away from us. Or so I thought. One chilly autumn morning, as fog hung low over the river like a soft blanket, I stepped outside with my steaming mug of coffee. The air smelled fresh, crisp, and alive. But something felt off. As I walked toward the railing of our deck, I froze. Down by the riverbank, two men were pacing back and forth, holding clipboards and measuring tapes. They looked official, dressed in khaki uniforms, but there was nothing official about the way they were stomping around my land. My stomach churned. Who were these people? Why were they here? And why did they look so comfortable walking around a place that clearly belonged to us? I didn't think twice. Clutching my coffee mug tightly, I marched down the hill, my boots crunching against the gravel path. "Excuse me," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside me. Both men turned to face me. One of them gave me a polite nod, while the other wore an irritatingly smug grin that made my skin crawl. "Can I help you?" I asked sharply, stopping a few feet away. My arms instinctively crossed over my chest, as if to shield myself from whatever nonsense they were about to spew. The smug one spoke first. "We're here on behalf of the HOA," he said, his tone dripping with fake politeness. "There seems to be some confusion regarding the boundaries of your property." "Confusion," I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "This is private property. You don't have permission to be here." He pulled out a piece of paper, a blurry photocopy of what looked like an old map, and pointed to a dotted line. "According to these records, this portion of the riverbank falls under HOA jurisdiction." My heart sank. The area he pointed to included not only the riverbank, but also part of the wooded slope that led up to our backyard. If they really believed this nonsense, we'd lose access to the river entirely. No more quiet mornings by the water. No more lazy afternoons floating in my kayak. Nothing. "This is absurd," I snapped, glaring at him. "You can't just claim something that isn't yours." His smirk grew wider. "Actually, we can. And we will." Standing there, staring at those two strangers trespassing on my land, I realized this wasn't just about a riverbank anymore. It was about control, about power, and I wasn't going to let them win. Not without a fight. I stormed down the hill, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The two men by the riverbank turned as I approached, their faces calm but unreadable. One of them held a clipboard, while the other fiddled with a measuring tape. They looked official, dressed in matching khaki uniforms, but there was nothing official about the way they were standing on my land. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice sharp and loud enough to carry over the rustling leaves. Both men turned toward me, startled. The one with the clipboard gave me a polite nod, but the other wore an irritatingly smug grin that made my stomach churn. "Can I help you?" I demanded, stopping a few feet away. My arms instinctively crossed over my chest, as if to shield myself from whatever nonsense they were about to spew. The smug one spoke first. "We're here on behalf of the HOA," he said smoothly, his tone dripping with fake politeness. "There seems to be some confusion regarding the boundaries of your property." "Confusion," I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "This is private property. You don't have permission to be here." He pulled out a piece of paper, a blurry photocopy of what looked like an old map, and pointed to a dotted line. "According to these records, this portion of the riverbank falls under HOA jurisdiction." My blood ran cold. The area he indicated included not only the riverbank, but also part of the wooded slope leading up to our backyard. If they really believed this nonsense, we'd lose access to the river entirely. No more quiet mornings sipping coffee by the water. No more lazy afternoons floating in my kayak. Nothing. "This is absurd," I snapped, glaring at him. "You can't just claim something that isn't yours." His smirk grew wider. "Actually, we can. And we will." Standing there, staring at those two strangers trespassing on my land, I realized this wasn't just about a riverbank anymore. It was about control. About power, and I wasn't going to let them win. Not without a fight. After they left, graciously allowing themselves off my property, I called Mark, who was already at work. His response was calm but firm. "Don't worry, babe. We'll figure this out." Easier said than done. Over the next few days, I scored every document related to our purchase. Deeds, surveys, title insurance policies. Everything confirmed what I already knew. The riverbank belonged to us. Yet the HOA insisted otherwise, citing outdated maps and vague clauses buried deep within the covenants. Desperate for clarity, I visited the county assessor's office. The clerk there, a kindly woman named Rita, examined the documents I'd brought and frowned. "Looks like there's been some creative interpretation going on," she said diplomatically. She handed me copies of the original plat maps, which clearly showed the riverbank as part of our parcel. Armed with evidence, I felt a flicker of hope. But hope isn't always enough. After the two men left, their smug expressions still burned in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were trying to steal something precious from us, something we had worked so hard for. The riverbank wasn't just a piece of land. It was part of our home, part of who we were. Losing it would feel like losing a limb. But how could this even be happening? We had paid for this property fair and square. The HOA couldn't just waltz in and claim what wasn't theirs, could they? I spent the rest of the day poring over every document I could find. I rummaged through filing cabinets, dug out boxes from the attic, and even called Mark at work to ask if he kept any extra copies of our closing papers. By evening, the dining table was covered in stacks of documents. Deeds, surveys, title insurance policies, and old letters from the real estate agent. My head spun as I flipped through page after page, searching for answers. Finally, I found it, the original survey map. It clearly showed the boundaries of our property, including the riverbank. There was no mistaking it. The dotted line ran right along the edge of the water, leaving no room for interpretation. That land was ours. End of story. But the HOA's claims gnawed at me. They wouldn't dare make such bold accusations without some kind of backup, would they? Maybe there was more to this than met the eye. Determined to get to the bottom of things, I decided to visit the county assessor's office the next morning. The drive to the office felt longer than usual, my hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. When I arrived, I was greeted by a friendly woman named Rita. She listened patiently as I explained the situation, nodding occasionally while jotting down notes. Then she asked for the documents I had brought. After flipping through them and comparing them to the county's records, she frowned. "Well," she said slowly, "it looks like there's been some creative interpretation going on here." Her tone was gentle, but her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Creative interpretation. What did that even mean? Rita pulled out an older map from the archives, one that predated the development of Willow Creek Estates. She spread it across the counter and pointed to the same area in question. Sure enough, the riverbank was marked as private property, just like our survey showed. "This is consistent with your deed," she said firmly. "There shouldn't be any confusion about ownership." Relief washed over me, but only for a moment. If the county records backed us up, why was the HOA pushing so hard to take our land? Something didn't add up. Rita must have noticed the worry on my face because she leaned in closer and lowered her voice. Sometimes, associations try to expand their control by redefining boundaries, she said carefully. It's not uncommon, but it's also not legal. Her words sent a chill down my spine. Were they really trying to rewrite history just to get their hands on our property? And if they were willing to go this far, what else might they do? On the drive home, I replayed everything in my mind. The HOA's map, the county records, Rita's warning. It all pointed to one thing: a fight. A big one. This wasn't just about a patch of land anymore. It was about standing up for ourselves, for our rights, and for the home we loved. When I got back, Mark was waiting for me in the kitchen. He took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, concern etched into his features. I handed him the copies of the maps and explained everything Rita had told me. For a moment, he was silent, processing it all. Then he looked at me, his jaw set with determination. "We're not backing down," he said firmly. "Not this time." And for the first time since those men showed up on our property, I felt a flicker of hope. Armed with evidence and a newfound resolve, we were ready to face whatever came next. But deep down, I couldn't help wondering, how far would the HOA go to get what they wanted? And could we really stop them? The next HOA meeting loomed over me like a storm cloud. I knew this was my chance to confront them head-on, but the thought of standing in front of that room full of people made my stomach twist into knots. What if they didn't listen? What if they laughed at me or dismissed my evidence as irrelevant? I couldn't let fear stop me, though. This wasn't just about me. It was about setting a boundary, showing them that we wouldn't be pushed around. Mark tried to calm me down before we left. "Just stick to the facts," he said, handing me the folder filled with our documents. "They can't argue with proof." I nodded, clutching the folder tightly as we walked into the community center where the meetings were held. The room buzzed with chatter, and I scanned the faces of my neighbors. Some looked curious, others indifferent, and a few seemed annoyed, probably because they thought I was stirring up trouble. Beverly sat at the head of the table, her usual air of superiority radiating off her like perfume. She glanced at me briefly, then went back to shuffling papers, as if I were no more than a minor inconvenience. When it was finally my turn to speak, I stood up, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. All eyes turned to me, and for a second, I forgot how to start. Then I took a deep breath and forced myself to focus. "I'm here today because there's been a serious misunderstanding," I began, holding up the survey map. "This is the official record of our property lines. It clearly shows that the riverbank belongs to us. Yet the HOA claims otherwise, citing outdated maps and vague language from the covenants." Beverly raised an eyebrow, but didn't interrupt. Encouraged, I continued, "You're not just challenging my ownership, you're ignoring legal documents and county records. And now you've sent people onto my land without permission. That's trespassing, plain and simple." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, while others whispered among themselves. One man near the back even gave me a thumbs up, which surprised me enough to make me smile briefly. But Beverly remained unmoved. "While your documents are interesting," she said coolly, leaning forward slightly, "they don't override the association's master plan. As stewards of this community, it's our responsibility to ensure all common areas are properly maintained." "Common areas," I repeated, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "That's not a common area. It's my asterisk backyard. How can you justify taking private property and calling it yours?" Her lips curled into a thin smile. "It's not about taking anything. It's about preserving the integrity of Willow Creek Estates. If every homeowner decided to do whatever they pleased, where would that leave us?" Her words hit their mark, sparking murmurs of agreement from some corners of the room. Others frowned, clearly uncomfortable with her logic. A woman sitting near the front spoke up hesitantly. But shouldn't private property rights come first? Isn't that why we have deeds and surveys in the first place? Beverly shot her a sharp look, silencing her instantly. Then she turned back to me, her tone icy. If you truly believe you're in the right, feel free to take this matter to court. Until then, the HOA's decision stands. The room erupted into arguments, voices overlapping in a chaotic mess. Some supported me, shouting about fairness and justice, while others sided with Beverly, muttering about rules and order. Chairs scraped against the floor as tempers flared, and I felt the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This wasn't just a dispute anymore. It was a battle for the soul of the neighborhood. As the meeting dragged on, nothing was resolved. By the time it ended, I was exhausted, my throat raw from speaking, and my mind racing with questions. Had I made any progress, or had I just dug myself deeper into a hole? Either way, one thing was clear. The HOA wasn't going to back down easily, and neither was I. The days following the HOA meeting were a blur of tension and uncertainty. I thought presenting clear evidence would be enough to make them back off. But instead, it felt like we'd only poured fuel on a fire that was already burning out of control. Beverly and her board weren't just ignoring our claims. They were doubling down, determined to prove they were untouchable. And then came the night that changed everything. It started with the sound of engines, a low rumble that woke me from a restless sleep. At first, I thought it was thunder or maybe a storm rolling in. But when I pulled back the curtains and peered outside, my blood ran cold. Floodlights illuminated the riverbank, casting harsh shadows across the trees. Men in reflective vests moved quickly, unloading tools and materials from a truck parked near the water's edge. They were building something. A fence. "Mark," I hissed, shaking him awake. "They're here. Right now. On our property." He bolted upright, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What? Who?" "The HOA," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "They're putting up a fence." Without another word, Mark grabbed his phone and dialed 911. While he explained the situation to the dispatcher, I threw on a jacket and stormed outside, heart pounding. The workers barely glanced at me as I approached, acting as though I were invisible. One of them held a clipboard, barking orders while another hammered metal posts into the ground. "What do you think you're doing?" I demanded, my voice rising above the noise of drills and hammers. "This is private property. You have no right to be here." The foreman finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "We're acting under direct orders from the HOA," he said flatly. "If you've got a problem, take it up with them. This isn't about the HOA. It's about trespassing." I shot back, my hands clenched into fists. "You're stealing my land." Before he could respond, red and blue lights flashed in the distance. The police had arrived. 2 officers stepped out of their car, their faces calm but wary as they assessed the scene. Mark joined me by the riverbank, and together, we explained what was happening. "These men are installing a fence on our property without permission," Mark told the officers firmly. "We have all the legal documents proving this land belongs to us." The foreman chimed in, unfazed. "We've been hired by the HOA to secure common areas. If there's a dispute, it's between them and the homeowner." The officers exchanged a glance, clearly caught in the middle of something bigger than they'd anticipated. After a few moments, one of them spoke. "Ma'am, this appears to be a civil matter. You'll need to resolve it through the courts. We can't intervene unless there's a direct threat to safety." I wanted to scream. A direct threat? Wasn't having strangers invade your property and build a fence against your will a threat? But arguing wouldn't change anything. The police couldn't stop them, and by the time the sun rose, the fence stood tall and imposing, cutting us off from the river completely. Standing there, staring at the barrier that now separated us from the water, I felt a wave of helplessness crash over me. It wasn't just wood and metal. It was a symbol of power, control, and disregard for fairness. How could they justify taking something so precious? Later that morning, Mark wrapped an arm around my shoulders as we sat on the deck, staring at the fenced-off riverbank. "We're not giving up," he said quietly. "This isn't over." I nodded, blinking back tears. He was right. As painful as it was to see that fence, I refused to let them win. This fight wasn't just about reclaiming our land. It was about standing up for what was right, even when it felt impossible. And if the HOA thought they could break us, they were dead wrong. The fence wasn't just a physical barrier. It was a declaration of war. Every time I looked out my window and saw it standing there, cold and unyielding, it felt like a personal insult. The HOA had crossed a line, and they knew it. But instead of backing down, Mark and I decided to fight back harder. This wasn't just our battle anymore. It was about sending a message to the entire neighborhood. If they could do this to us, they could do it to anyone. I called Tom first. He'd been my ally during past conflicts with the HOA, and I knew he'd understand how serious this was. When I told him what had happened, his voice grew sharp with anger. "They can't get away with this," he said firmly. "We need to rally people." Together, we came up with a plan. Flyers went up overnight, plastered on bulletin boards and tucked into mailboxes across Willow Creek Estates. The message was simple: your rights matter. Stand with us against HOA overreach. We didn't just want sympathy. We wanted action. A protest was scheduled for the following Saturday, right in front of the community center where the HOA held their meetings. To our surprise, dozens of neighbors showed up. Some were longtime supporters who had always opposed Beverly's iron grip, while others were newcomers who admitted they hadn't realized how far the board would go to enforce its rules. Even a few former fence-sitters joined in, shaken by the sight of that fence and what it represented. For the first time, I felt like we weren't alone. Local reporters arrived too, drawn by the growing buzz around the story. Cameras rolled as I stood before the crowd, holding up copies of our deed and survey maps. "This isn't just about a riverbank," I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. "It's about fairness, about protecting the things that belong to us. If we let them take this, what's next?" Cheers erupted from the group, and for a moment, I allowed myself to feel hopeful. But hope alone wouldn't win this fight. That's why Mark and I also hired a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Claire who specialized in property disputes. She reviewed all our documents, pored over the covenants, and assured us we had a strong case. "This is textbook trespassing," she said confidently. "We'll make sure they pay for it." Meanwhile, the HOA scrambled to defend itself. Beverly issued a statement claiming the fence was necessary to protect community interests and accused us of stirring up unnecessary drama. Her words dripped with condescension, but they didn't sway public opinion. More and more residents began questioning the board's motives, and cracks started forming in their once unified facade. As pressure mounted, so did their desperation. Anonymous notes appeared on our doorstep, warning us to drop it or face consequences. Someone slashed one of our car tires overnight. Mark suggested installing security cameras, but I refused to live in fear. Let them try to intimidate us. It only strengthened my resolve. By the time the protest ended, the neighborhood was buzzing with conversation. People talked openly about reforming the HOA, demanding transparency, and even replacing the current board members. What had started as a personal fight became a movement, uniting neighbors who had never spoken before. Late one night, as Mark and I sat on the porch watching the stars, I felt a flicker of pride. No matter what happened next, we'd already achieved something important. We'd reminded everyone that standing together made us stronger, and if the HOA thought a fence could silence us, they were wrong. Dead wrong. The real battle was still ahead, but for the first time, I believed we might actually win. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with tension as lawyers argued, witnesses testified, and neighbors whispered nervously in the gallery. It had been weeks since the protest, and now the final showdown was here. Mark and I sat side by side at the plaintiff's table, clutching hands tightly under the surface. Every word spoken seemed to hang in the air, heavy with consequence. Our lawyer, Claire, opened the case with precision, laying out our evidence piece by piece. She presented the original survey maps, the county records, and even expert testimony from a licensed surveyor who confirmed that the riverbank belonged to us without a shadow of a doubt. "This isn't just about property lines," she said, her voice firm and commanding. "It's about respecting legal boundaries and individual rights." Beverly and the HOA's attorney countered with their usual arguments: vague clauses in the covenants, outdated maps, and claims of community interest. But their case began to crumble when Claire cross-examined their witnesses. One by one, their experts admitted inconsistencies in the HOA's interpretation of the documents. By the time Beverly took the stand, her polished demeanor faltered under Claire's relentless questioning. "Ms. Sullivan," Claire said, leaning slightly over the podium, "can you explain why the HOA chose to act on these alleged discrepancies only now, after years of peaceful coexistence with the homeowners?" Beverly hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. "We were simply following protocol," she replied stiffly. "And yet," Claire pressed, "you sent workers onto private property in the middle of the night without notifying the owners or seeking legal clarification. Isn't that trespassing?" The room fell silent. Beverly shifted uncomfortably in her seat, unable to answer directly. The judge scribbled notes, his expression unreadable but clearly unimpressed. Finally, after hours of deliberation, the verdict came down. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom like thunder. "Based on the evidence presented, it is clear that the disputed riverbank belongs to the plaintiffs. Furthermore, the actions taken by the defendant constitute trespassing and unjust interference with private property rights." Cheers erupted from our supporters in the gallery, but I could barely hear them over the rush of relief flooding through me. Mark squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, but I didn't care. We'd won. The riverbank was ours again. Within days, the fence was torn down, its posts and panels carted away like relics of a bad dream. Standing on the bank once more, feeling the cool breeze off the water, I almost couldn't believe it was real. The HOA was ordered to pay damages for their illegal actions, though the money wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was the principle, the acknowledgement that no one, not even an all-powerful board, could trample over people's rights without facing consequences. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood began to change. Neighbors who had kept their distance before started stopping by to chat. Tom organized regular gatherings, fostering a sense of unity that hadn't existed before. Even some former critics of ours softened their stance, admitting quietly that they admired our courage. As for Beverly and the HOA board, they resigned en masse within a month, humiliated and stripped of authority. A new board was elected, people who genuinely cared about the community rather than wielding power for its own sake. Willow Creek Estates still had rules, of course, but they were fairer, more reasonable, and created with input from everyone. Looking back, I realized this fight had taught me something profound. Standing up for yourself doesn't mean going it alone. It means finding allies, speaking truth to power, and refusing to let fear dictate your choices. The riverbank wasn't just land anymore. It was a symbol of resilience, justice, and the strength of a united community. And as I watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, I knew we'd reclaimed more than just a piece of earth. We'd reclaimed our voices and our home.